Gilgamesh was born in the ancient city of Uruk, one of the earliest great urban centers of human civilization. Rising between the rivers, Uruk was a place of towering walls, sacred temples, and organized life shaped by law, labor, and belief. From the moment of his birth, Gilgamesh was set apart from ordinary men, not only by royal status, but by his very nature. Tradition held that his mother was the goddess Ninsun, a divine figure of wisdom and protection, while his father was mortal. This union placed Gilgamesh at the boundary between the human world and the realm of the gods, a position both powerful and isolating. He was described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human, a formula that explained his extraordinary abilities. His strength surpassed that of any warrior in Uruk, and his intelligence matched his physical power. He learned quickly, ruled decisively, and carried himself with an authority that seemed instinctive rather than taught. To the people he appeared almost unstoppable, a king whose presence alone could command obedience. His divine portion granted him confidence and ambition, while his human side grounded him in the physical world of desire, fear, and emotion. Yet this mixed nature also created deep inner tension. Gilgamesh was not fully divine, and therefore not immortal. He could feel pain, anger, pride, and uncertainty in ways the gods did not. At the same time, he was too powerful to live as an ordinary man. This imbalance shaped his character, driving him to test limits and assert dominance, as if trying to prove that his strength could overcome the vulnerability hidden within him. His restless energy and hunger for recognition reflected a deeper struggle to understand who he truly was. In Gilgamesh, the ancient world imagined a ruler who embodied both human potential and human anxiety. He stood as a symbol of civilization itself, strong, ambitious, creative, yet deeply flawed. His semi-divine birth did not grant him peace or clarity. Instead, it set him on a lifelong path of conflict, growth, and questioning. Long before his great deeds and legendary journeys, this inner division defined him, shaping the king who would seek meaning beyond power and legacy beyond strength. When Gilgamesh rose to the throne of Uruk, his reign quickly became a display of unchecked power. Endowed with extraordinary strength and confidence, he ruled as if no boundary applied to him. Laws existed, traditions endured, yet the king stood above them all. What began as awe toward a semi-divine ruler slowly hardened into fear, as his authority turned from leadership into domination. Young men of Uruk bore the heaviest burden of his rule. They were driven into constant labor, summoned for construction, training, and royal demands that never seemed to end. Day after day, their strength was consumed by the ambitions of a king who sought to shape the city according to his own will. Fatigue spread through the population, not just in tired bodies, but in spirits worn down by endless obligation. The reach of Gilgamesh's power did not stop at public life. Within private households, his presence was felt as a violation rather than protection. Families lived under the shadow of royal intrusion, uncertain when the king's desires might override custom and dignity. Trust in the throne eroded, and silence replaced loyalty, as resentment grew behind closed doors. With no mortal force capable of resisting him, the people of Uruk turned to the divine. Their prayers rose from streets, homes, and temples, filled with desperation rather than praise. They asked the gods not for conquest or wealth, but for balance and relief from a ruler who had forgotten restraint. In these collective cries, the ancient world marked a turning point, when divine intervention became the only hope against absolute power. The cries of the people of Uruk did not go unheard. The gods, observing the growing imbalance caused by Gilgamesh's unchecked power, chose not to punish the king directly. Instead, they sought a subtler solution, one that would restore harmony without destroying what had already been built. From this divine decision came the creation of Enkidu, a being designed not as an enemy, but as a counterweight. Enkidu was formed by the gods from clay, shaped by divine hands yet left untouched by human society. He was released into the wilderness, far from walls, laws, and kings. There, he lived among wild animals, sharing their rhythms and instincts. He ran with gazelles, drank beside herds, and slept beneath open skies, his life guided by the natural world rather than human order. Unlike Gilgamesh, Enkidu had no desire for rule or recognition. His strength was raw and unrefined, drawn directly from the earth. He protected animals from hunters, tearing apart traps and breaking snares, acting as a living force of balance against human dominance over nature. In his presence, the boundary between man and beast seemed to disappear. Through Enkidu, the gods introduced instinct to confront ambition and nature to challenge civilization. He embodied what Gilgamesh lacked: restraint without weakness, power without pride. Their eventual meeting was inevitable, for Enkidu was not created to remain in the wild forever. He was meant to step into the world of men, to confront the king of Uruk, and to begin a transformation that would reshape them both. When Gilgamesh and Enkidu finally encountered one another, their meeting was charged with tension long before the first blow was struck. Two forces shaped by entirely different worlds stood face to face, one born of a city of stone and law, the other formed by open land and instinct. There was no hesitation, no attempt at negotiation. Their first response was violence, as if only strength could determine who had the right to stand. The clash that followed was unlike anything Uruk had witnessed. They grappled in the streets, their bodies colliding with a force that shook walls and doorways. Dust rose around them as they struggled, each refusing to yield. Gilgamesh pressed forward with the discipline of a ruler and warrior, while Enkidu answered with the raw, unpredictable power of the wild. The fight was long, exhausting, and perfectly balanced. For the first time in his life, Gilgamesh met an equal. No matter how hard he pushed, Enkidu did not fall. No matter how fiercely Enkidu resisted, the king did not break. As their strength finally waned, the battle reached a standstill, not through defeat, but through recognition. Each understood that victory was impossible without destroying himself as well. In that moment, hostility gave way to understanding. The struggle revealed more than physical power. It exposed shared courage, endurance, and spirit. Gilgamesh saw in Enkidu a reflection of his own strength without the weight of kingship, while Enkidu saw in Gilgamesh a man burdened by authority rather than driven solely by desire. Respect replaced rivalry as quickly as anger had once taken hold. From this encounter, an unbreakable bond was formed. Their friendship was forged through equality, not submission, and strengthened by mutual admiration. Together, they became more than they had ever been alone. The king gained balance, and the wild man gained purpose, united as brothers whose shared journey would shape legend and redefine what it meant to be truly strong. Driven by a restless desire for lasting fame, Gilgamesh proposed a journey beyond the safety of Uruk, toward a place few dared to imagine, let alone enter. The cedar forest lay far away, sacred and dangerous, known as a realm set apart by the gods themselves. To Gilgamesh, it represented an opportunity to carve his name into eternity, to Enkidu, who knew the wild and its spirits, it was a place of deep power and serious risk. Yet loyalty bound them together, and the call of glory proved stronger than fear. As they prepared for the journey, warnings followed them at every step. Elders spoke of Humbaba, the monstrous guardian appointed by the gods to protect the forest. Enkidu himself felt unease, sensing that this was not an ordinary enemy, but a force tied to divine order. Even so, Gilgamesh pressed forward, convinced that greatness could only be achieved by confronting what others avoided. Their departure marked a clear break from the world of men into a landscape shaped by myth and divine presence. The cedar forest was unlike anything they had known. Towering trees rose like pillars toward the sky, their silence heavy and watchful. The air itself seemed alive, charged with a presence that tested their resolve. When Humbaba finally appeared, his voice thundered through the forest, striking fear into their hearts. He was not merely a creature of strength, but a symbol of the gods' authority over nature, and his anger carried the weight of that sacred duty. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Humbaba's power overwhelmed them at first, and doubt crept in as divine warnings echoed in their minds. Yet together, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood firm. With courage, desperation, and unity, they struck down the guardian. Humbaba's pleas for mercy went unanswered, and with his death, the forest fell silent. In that moment, victory was achieved, but at a cost not yet fully understood. They returned from the cedar forest as heroes, their names spoken with awe across Uruk and beyond. Fame followed them, just as Gilgamesh had desired, and their bond was strengthened by shared triumph. Yet beneath the celebration lingered an unspoken tension. By killing Humbaba, they had crossed a boundary set by the gods themselves. The journey had brought glory, but it also set unseen forces into motion, forces that would soon demand a price for defying divine order. After their return from the cedar forest, Gilgamesh's fame spread far beyond the walls of Uruk, reaching even the gods themselves. Among them was Ishtar, the powerful goddess of love, fertility, and war. Drawn to Gilgamesh's strength and renown, she offered him her desire and the promise of divine favor. To accept her would have meant power, wealth, and protection beyond measure. Gilgamesh refused. His rejection was not careless, but deliberate and sharp. He reminded Ishtar of her past lovers, kings and heroes who had been discarded, broken, or destroyed once her passion faded. In doing so, he exposed the cost of her love and denied her authority over him. For a mortal king to speak so boldly to a goddess was an act of extraordinary defiance. Ishtar's pride was deeply wounded. Enraged by humiliation, she ascended to the heavens and demanded punishment from the gods. As retribution, she unleashed the bull of heaven, a monstrous force of destruction sent to crush Uruk. When it descended, the earth shook, fields split open, and terror spread through the city as the beast brought famine and death in its wake. Gilgamesh and Enkidu faced the bull together. The battle was brutal and desperate, pitting human resolve against divine wrath. Working in perfect unity, they outmaneuvered the creature, striking with precision and courage. At last, the bull of heaven fell, its massive body collapsing in defeat. Once again, the two companions had overcome a force meant to humble them. Their victory, however, carried grave consequences. By killing a divine creature sent by a goddess, Gilgamesh and Enkidu crossed another sacred line. Though the city was saved and their fame grew even greater, the balance between mortals and gods had been challenged once more. In the silence after celebration, the gods took note, and this time, their response would not be delayed. The gods did not strike immediately, but their judgment was certain. After the slaying of Humbaba and the Bull of Heaven, the balance between mortals and the divine had been broken too many times. In their council, the gods decided that punishment was necessary, not against Gilgamesh, whose fate would unfold differently, but against Enkidu, the one created to restore balance. His death would serve as both justice and warning. Enkidu's punishment came slowly, not in battle, but through illness. Once powerful and fearless, he was reduced to weakness and pain. His body failed him day by day, and the strength that once rivaled Gilgamesh faded into exhaustion. As he lay confined, Enkidu began to understand that this suffering was not chance, but a divine sentence that could not be escaped. During his illness, Enkidu was consumed by bitterness and fear. He cursed the moments that had led him from the wild into the world of men, blaming the path that brought him glory, but also death. Yet even in anger, his thoughts turned to Gilgamesh. He knew his death would leave his friend alone, and this realization deepened the tragedy of his fate. When Enkidu finally died, the loss struck Gilgamesh with overwhelming force. For the first time, the mighty king was powerless. He held his friend's body, refusing to accept that life had left it. The companion who had matched his strength, balanced his spirit, and shared his victories was gone, taken not by an enemy, but by the will of the gods. Enkidu's death shattered Gilgamesh's inner world. Grief replaced pride, and fear replaced confidence. In losing his brother, Gilgamesh was forced to confront a truth he had long avoided, that even the strongest are not immune to death. This moment marked a turning point, transforming a king obsessed with glory into a man haunted by mortality, driven to seek answers beyond power and fame. Enkidu's death left Gilgamesh alone, with a fear he had never known before. Until that moment, death had been something distant, an idea that belonged to others, warriors, enemies, ordinary men. Now it stood directly before him, undeniable and personal. As he looked upon his friend's lifeless body, Gilgamesh realized that the same fate awaited him, regardless of his strength or divine blood. This awareness unsettled him deeply. The king who had once feared nothing began to question everything. Power, victories, and fame suddenly felt fragile, unable to protect him from the one enemy that could not be defeated by force. Night after night, thoughts of decay and oblivion haunted him, turning his grief into anxiety and his sorrow into dread. For the first time, Gilgamesh understood that being two-thirds divine did not mean being immortal. His human part would one day fail, just as Enkidu's had. This realization shattered the confidence that had defined his rule. The walls of Uruk, once symbols of permanence, now seemed powerless against time itself. Driven by terror rather than ambition, Gilgamesh made a decisive choice. He would not wait for death to claim him. Leaving his throne, his people, and the comforts of kingship behind, he set out alone into the unknown. His goal was no longer glory, but escape. From mortality, from loss, from the fate shared by all humans. Thus began a journey unlike any he had taken before. Gilgamesh walked away from Uruk not as a conquering hero, but as a desperate seeker. The road ahead promised hardship and uncertainty, yet he followed it without hesitation, believing that somewhere beyond the limits of the known world, the secret of eternal life might still be found. Gilgamesh's journey carried him far beyond the boundaries of the human world, into landscapes shaped by myth rather than memory. He crossed deserts scorched by the sun, passed through regions of darkness and silence, and endured trials meant to turn mortals back. Each step forward was driven by a single thought, that somewhere, someone had escaped death, and that secret could still be reached. At the edge of the world, Gilgamesh finally encountered Utnapishtim, a figure unlike any other. He was a man who had survived a great flood sent by the gods, spared from destruction, and granted eternal life. To Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim represented hope made real, the proof that death was not absolute. Standing before him, the weary king believed his long search had at last reached its answer. Utnapishtim listened as Gilgamesh spoke of Enkidu, of fear, and of the desperate desire to live forever. In response, he told the story of the flood, describing how the gods had once chosen to erase humanity and how he alone had been saved through divine favor. His immortality, he explained, was not earned through strength or courage, but given as a unique reward, never meant to be repeated. To test Gilgamesh's readiness, Utnapishtim challenged him to overcome something simple yet impossible: the need for rest. If Gilgamesh could stay awake for several days, he might prove himself worthy of escaping death. Exhausted by his journey and grief, the king failed almost immediately. Sleep claimed him, quietly and without resistance, revealing the limits of human will. Through this failure, the truth became clear. Immortality was not a prize waiting to be claimed, but a boundary set by the gods themselves. Gilgamesh learned that no matter how far a man traveled or how great his deeds, eternal life was not meant for humans. What remained was not the promise of endless years, but the challenge of finding meaning within a life that must one day end. Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, not as the triumphant hero he had once imagined, but as a man changed by understanding. The journey in search of immortality had stripped away his illusions, leaving behind clarity instead of conquest. Though his hands were empty of eternal life, his mind was full of insight earned through suffering, loss, and failure. For the first time, Gilgamesh accepted a truth he had long resisted. Death was not an enemy to be conquered, but a boundary that defined what it meant to be human. His strength, his divine heritage, and his fame could not remove him from this shared fate. Rather than fearing this reality, he began to see it as something that gave life its urgency and value. As he walked once more through the streets of Uruk, Gilgamesh looked upon the city with new eyes. The great walls, the temples, and the ordered life within them were no longer symbols of his power alone, but of collective human effort and endurance. These were achievements that could outlast a single lifetime, offering a form of permanence rooted not in the body, but in legacy. Gilgamesh's rule changed as his understanding deepened. Where once he had governed through force and excess, he now ruled with restraint and purpose. He recognized his responsibility not as a ruler above his people, but as a guardian of their future. Justice, balance, and care replaced ambition as the foundation of his kingship. In accepting his mortality, Gilgamesh found meaning greater than immortality itself. His story no longer centered on defying the gods or escaping death, but on living fully within human limits. Through wisdom, memory, and lasting deeds, he discovered that a mortal life, when shaped with understanding, could still achieve something enduring.